The aftermath wasn't quiet. Word spread through the town faster than fire on dry grass. By the next morning, my inbox had 27 messages from neighbors, county officials, and 2 local reporters who'd somehow caught wind of a raid involving the HOA and a SWAT team. I didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. I spent the morning reviewing footage, backing everything up to 2 encrypted drives, and handing over full copies to the sheriff's office. Mitch called just after noon. His voice was calm, but I could hear the weight behind it. He told me charges were being finalized against the 3 impersonators, including criminal impersonation, unlawful entry, attempted coercion, and possession of a weapon replica during commission of a felony. Karen, however, was the real story. She wasn't just being charged with conspiracy and property violation. She was being investigated for running what might be considered an unauthorized private enforcement scheme under the guise of the HOA. That crossed into fraud, endangerment, and potentially federal wire charges if her messages to those men crossed state networks. And based on the texts and emails already recovered, she had been orchestrating this longer than anyone thought. Later that afternoon, I was sitting on the porch watching the sun dip low behind the barn when a gray sedan pulled into the gravel lot near my main gate. It was an unmarked government car, the kind that didn't announce itself but didn't need to. A tall woman in a dark blue suit stepped out, flashed her credentials without needing to say a word, and asked if we could talk. I nodded and led her to the table near the side of the house. She introduced herself as a representative from the State Enforcement Oversight Bureau. Her job was to investigate civil entities that abused authority or crossed into quasi-legal enforcement activity without state approval. She'd been forwarded the footage, the charges, the camera data, and Karen's digital footprint. She asked only a few questions, mostly about my property's layout and how long I'd had surveillance and lockdown systems in place. I answered clearly, showing her the timestamps and schematics. She never smiled. She took notes in a tiny black notebook. But as she stood to leave, she looked me in the eye and said something I wasn't expecting. She told me I had done everything by the book and that without my restraint and preparedness, this might have turned into a shooting. That chilled me more than anything else. Because I had thought the same thing but never said it out loud. By the next morning, a news crew had posted a blurred-out segment on social media showing Karen being led away from my ranch in cuffs. The video only lasted 10 seconds, but it went viral fast. Within 2 days, Karen's name was trending locally. The HOA board held an emergency vote and unanimously removed her from her position. They issued a public apology on their website, full of polished phrases like regrettable decisions and under review and not reflective of the community values. But none of it mattered. The residents had seen the footage. They had heard the audio. And for once, they didn't rally behind the rules, they rallied behind someone who had stood his ground. A few days later, I walked into town for supplies. Normally, I keep to myself, but people stopped me everywhere. Some shook my hand. Some apologized for not believing me when I said Karen was dangerous. One older woman gave me a pie and said, in a quiet voice, that her nephew had been fined over a dozen times by Karen's group for made-up violations like decorative rocks and mailbox angles. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't just about me or my ranch. It was about everyone who had been pushed around by someone who mistook paperwork for power. I wasn't just the guy who stopped a fake cop operation. I had become, somehow, a symbol of pushing back. Karen's charges multiplied quickly. Turns out, she'd been paying those fake officers from a slush fund marked under community enhancements, and she'd doctored invoices to make it look like they were landscaping and pest control services. The HOA members who tried to backpedal were now being investigated too. One even turned himself in, offering documentation that showed Karen had used intimidation tactics to silence dissenting board votes. The whole thing was crumbling like a house built on rotted beams. And in the middle of that collapse, I stayed quiet, methodical, and patient. 1 week later, Mitch and his team rolled up to the ranch, not for business, but for barbecue. It was something we joked about for years, getting together off-duty and watching old training footage while drinking cold beer in the barn. This time, We had something better. I had edited together a clean, time-stamped montage of the entire incident, from the moment the fake officers stepped onto the property to the moment SWAT boots hit the gravel. We watched it projected onto the side of the barn under the evening sky, the fire pit crackling behind us. Every now and then someone would whistle or laugh at the absurdity of it. When Karen yelled about being a victim of selective enforcement, the entire team burst out laughing. Near the end of the night, Mitch stood with a plate of brisket in one hand and his other hand resting on his belt. He looked around at the guys and then at me. He said with a grin that it was the first time he'd seen a civilian handle an escalation better than some trained operators. I shook my head and told him the truth. I wasn't trying to win. I was just trying to make sure no one got hurt. Because people like Karen, with just enough arrogance and just enough authority, were dangerous when unchecked. But people like her never expect the rancher to have better intel, better equipment, and better friends. After they left, I replaced the old sign at the front gate. It had just said private property before. Now it read something else. This property is protected by dogs, drones, and real law. No more polite warnings. No more patience for bullies with badges made of plastic and egos made of glass. The ranch was quiet again. The horses returned to their usual calm. Zero slept by the porch like nothing had ever happened. But everything had changed. Karen was gone. The HOA was under state review. And the story had spread further than I imagined. People from other states emailed me. A retired sheriff from Texas wrote me to say he dealt with the same thing 20 years ago and wished he'd had my setup. One man even offered to buy my camera blueprint for his neighborhood watch. I declined. This wasn't about selling fear or turning ranches into fortresses. It was about something simpler. Knowing your rights. Standing your ground. And never, ever letting fake power walk in uninvited. Because on this ranch, the law doesn't knock. It prepares, it protects, and when it needs to, it strikes back. Ask ChatGPT. The fake cops had barely enough time to register what was happening before the real ones moved. There was no yelling, no dramatic countdown, just a calculated silence that wrapped around the property like a noose. The first thing they saw were the red beams from the laser sights dancing across their chests and arms. Zero had gone completely still beside me, locked in place with his eyes narrowed, his training kicking in. I didn't need to say anything. The entire ranch was now a live operation zone. One of the impersonators stumbled back with his hands up, stuttering something about being authorized personnel. But nobody was listening. 2 SWAT agents closed in on him fast and clean, zip ties snapping into place in seconds. No resistance, no questions, just compliance and fear. Dan, the supposed leader, tried to talk, flashing that laminated fake badge again like it meant something. He started shouting legal buzzwords like he was auditioning for a courtroom TV show, tossing out terms like trespass, detainment, cease and desist. One of the SWAT team members raised an eyebrow, looked at the badge, then calmly disarmed him. They found a fake handgun in his holster, non-functional, but molded to look like a real sidearm. That was more than enough. Impersonating law enforcement with a look-alike weapon? That turned their HOA charade into a full-blown felony. I walked over to the edge of the corral where 2 of the real deputies had secured the second fake officer and were searching his gear. They found a flashlight, 2 zip ties, a half-used notebook of blank violation tickets, and a phone with an unsecured Wi-Fi hotspot labeled HOA Enforcement HQ. That was all I needed to know. These guys weren't just pretending. They'd set up a playbook, a routine, maybe even pulled this stunt on other properties. What they didn't count on was walking into a ranch equipped like a tactical fortress and owned by someone who'd written part of the SWAT training curriculum for the entire county. Karen, who had up to this point remained planted like some angry oak tree in designer boots, started shouting again. She marched up the gravel with 2 actual HOA board members trailing behind her, both of whom looked like they wanted to melt into the soil. She was on the phone, speaking fast, claiming that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, a blown out of proportion neighborhood issue. She tried to convince the SWAT commander, A man named Mitch who'd known me for over a decade, that I was the aggressor and they were the victims of overreaction. Mitch didn't even respond to her. He simply pointed at the drone feed hovering on a tablet in his hand. Karen's voice, clear as daylight, rang out through the speakers as she told one of the fake cops earlier. If he doesn't open the barn, kick it in. He thinks he's special, but he'll cave once we scare him a little. Her face strained of color. The board members took a step away from her. One of them started texting rapidly, probably trying to salvage their reputation before the news trucks showed up. The SWAT team worked efficiently, moving the fake cops into separate corners of the property for questioning. Real deputies began photographing everything: the fake badges, the fake tickets, the illegal entry attempts. One guy tried to claim he thought this was a reality TV prank show. Another blamed Karen directly, saying she promised it was legal and said she'd handle everything if it got messy. Nobody was buying it. Mitch gave me a quiet nod as he started the process of calling in federal assistance. Impersonating an officer while carrying a replica firearm crossed state lines in terms of charges. Homeland Security might even get a sniff of this one. Meanwhile, I took a walk around the perimeter just to calm my nerves. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the pasture. My horses were unsettled but unhurt. The surveillance systems had worked exactly as intended, triggering motion alerts and capturing everything from half a dozen angles. I spotted the black SUV again, parked behind the tool shed. Deputies were already dusting it for prints and checking the trunk. Inside, they found multiple sets of fake enforcement vests, 5 printed HOA inspection forms, and a laptop with a spreadsheet titled Target List. My name was third on that list. 2 other names had red checkmarks beside them. That made my blood run cold. I got back to the house and found one of the younger deputies going through Karen's public HOA correspondence file. He looked up and said quietly, "She's been pushing for months to get you listed as non-compliant. Even tried to call in a city building inspector last month but got denied. She's been escalating ever since." I nodded. I wasn't surprised. Karen didn't like people she couldn't intimidate. The mistake she made was thinking I'd be passive. That I'd just let her dig her way into my life with her fake rules and designer vengeance. She was sitting on a hay bale now, guarded by 2 officers, still muttering about her rights and how she was going to sue everyone in the county. One of the SWAT team medics offered her water. She swatted it away and screamed that she was being treated like a criminal. The irony hung in the air like smoke. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew she had crossed a line so thick and bright, it might as well have been painted in fire. I watched as Mitch gathered everyone for a final debrief. The fake cops were loaded into separate cruisers. Their gear was bagged and tagged. Karen was being held for questioning, her phone seized under probable cause for planning an illegal entry. The HOA board members had already vanished, their SUV peeling away from the scene with the urgency of people desperate to escape fallout. But the cameras caught their faces too. That would come in handy later. As the team packed up, Mitch walked over to me, his face calm but serious. "You know this isn't the last of it, right?" he said. "She's going to try and spin this." "I know," I said. "But now I've got everything on record. And next time, it won't be just her reputation that takes the hit." He nodded once, then turned to leave, the convoy of cruisers and tactical trucks trailing behind him. The moment they passed the gate, I walked over and flipped the system back into standby mode. The gates unlocked. The lights dimmed. The drone returned to its dock. Everything looked calm again. But under the surface, the entire ranch had changed. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was evidence. It was proof. And for people like Karen, that was the most dangerous thing of all. Ask ChatGPT. They showed up like they thought they were starring in some low-budget action movie. Tactical vests with fake patches, cargo pants tucked into scuffed boots, and one guy actually had aviators on at 7 in the morning. My dog Zero growled so hard it rattled the porch boards. The lead guy raised his hand to calm me down like he was some kind of sheriff, squinting at me with an overconfident smirk. "We're here to conduct a compliance check," he said, voice gravelly like he'd rehearsed it in the mirror. I didn't move, didn't blink. Just pressed my thumb against the hidden button under the fence post. In the next 2 seconds, my gates locked, my cameras activated, and my property turned into a trap. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just some grizzled rancher. I was the guy who trained SWAT on how to breach ranches like mine. And they had just walked onto the wrong stage. It started a few weeks earlier, when a bright orange violation notice was zip-tied to my front gate. It was printed in that overly aggressive HOA font, bold and all caps, like it was screaming through paper. It listed things like unauthorized fencing modifications, improper livestock containment, and excessive tactical equipment. That last one got a laugh out of me. Tactical equipment? I had a few training dummies, some obstacle courses from my time training K9S, and a couple of old tires stacked out back. If they were referring to my barn's drone bay, then sure, I guess that's tactical, but they need a warrant to even see that. At first, I brushed it off. I'd dealt with HOA noise before. This was ranch country, not some pristine suburban golf community. Most folks around here had fences older than their mortgages and tractors worth more than their houses. But this HOA was different. Karen had taken over the board. Not just any Karen, capital K, peroxide blonde, fake law degree framed in her hallway kind of Karen. She'd moved in a year ago, and since then, she'd waged war on every ranch that didn't bend to her idea of visual harmony. If it didn't look like a Bed Bath & Beyond catalog, she filed a complaint. Then came the letter. It was hand-delivered by a man in a polo shirt who looked like he worked mall security. It said I was due for a mandatory HOA enforcement review at 7 a.m. sharp on Friday. Failure to comply would result in fines, property liens, and a community enforcement response. That last part stuck with me. What the hell was a community enforcement response? Friday rolled around faster than I wanted. I didn't lose sleep over it, but I didn't dismiss it either. I spent Thursday night checking cameras, charging backup batteries, and syncing everything to my secure drive. I wasn't paranoid. I was experienced. 30 years in tactical logistics teaches you to respect chaos and prepare like it's already coming. When they rolled up, I was on the porch with my dog, a mug of black coffee in one hand and my thumb already brushing the emergency switch under the armrest. The lead guy had a shaved head, mirrored glasses, and a vest that read, HOA Enforcement Unit, in cheap vinyl letters. The other two were younger, nervous, and clearly out of place. One had a clipboard with what looked like printed-out neighborhood rules. The other kept fumbling with a fake walkie-talkie clipped to his shoulder. Sir, we're here for the compliance review. Step aside and let us access your structures. Got ID? I asked, not moving from the rocker. He held up a laminated card that looked like it had been made at a gas station print shop. No badge number, no state seal, just a made-up title and his name, Officer Dan. You're not law enforcement, I said calmly. And this is private land. He puffed his chest. We're contracted under Section 9.3 of the HOA bylaws. That gives us temporary access rights for inspections. Section 9.3 isn't state law, I replied. It's barely toilet paper. He stepped closer. If you resist inspection, that's obstruction. I gave Zero a quick hand signal. The dog stood up and trotted to the side, eyes never leaving the man's face. I'm not resisting. I'm waiting for real law enforcement to show up. The clipboard guy piped in. We're allowed to detain during active review periods. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Detain? With what authority? Who issued your badges? The neighborhood watch? That hit a nerve. Clipboard guy looked at Dan. Dan gave him a nod. And just like that, the third guy started circling around toward my barn. That's when I activated the lockdown. The front gate slammed shut with a metallic echo that made clipboard guy jump. The lights on my front posts flipped red. And inside the barn, a robotic voice announced, Surveillance mode activated. Dan whipped around, surprised. What the hell is this? This, I said, standing up slowly, is me giving you one last chance to leave. Of course, they didn't. Dan tried to grab my shoulder, but before he could make contact, Zero lunged between us with a bark that shook the windows. Dan froze, hands in the air. Back off, I warned. Touch me again and you'll get an up-close lesson in K9 compliance. They backed up, muttering into their fake radios, clearly unsure whether to stay or run. That's when I spoke into my watch mic. Confirm visual. Suspected impersonators on site. Engage silent protocol. SWAT go green. What they didn't know was that I was more than just friends with the sheriff's tactical team. I was their consultant. I designed breach simulations for half the counties in this state. The back of my barn wasn't just a tool shed, it was a command bay. And now, they were on camera from 6 different angles, every move recorded and transmitted directly to the real boys in blue. They wandered the edge of my property for a few more minutes, trying doors, snapping photos, pretending to radio a non-existent supervisor. That's when the SUV showed up. Black, shiny, and out of place. Karen stepped out wearing a designer trench coat and oversized sunglasses like she thought she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. She marched up and said, "This is your last warning. Comply with the inspection or we'll escalate this." "Karen," I said, "you've got 30 seconds to call off your goons before they get arrested for impersonating officers." She didn't flinch. "They're HOA security contractors. Perfectly legal. On public property, maybe. But here? You've stepped into something you don't understand." I stepped aside and nodded toward the driveway. That's when they heard it. Tires crunching gravel. Quiet, low-profile engines. Black trucks with no sirens, but unmistakable silhouettes. Doors opened in sync. Boots hit the ground. The real SWAT team had arrived. And the fake cops? They looked like they saw ghosts. Because, in a way, they had. The ghost of consequences had finally arrived. Ask ChatGPT.